Beauty in the Blood by Nikki Wrights. It was hard to find a decent guy these days. New York was a city of dreamers, artists, and absolute weirdos. And out of the three, you only seemed to attract the latter. You've been to speed dating events and singles nights at your local bar, but there was never a connection, never a spark. And every guy seemed to have something fundamentally wrong with him. It wasn't that you were looking for the absolute perfect guy. It was just that you met too many who were demanding, controlling, or misogynistic. You'd given up on finding your special someone a year after you moved to the city. After all, being single wasn't too bad. You could do what you want whenever you wanted without having to think about someone else. So what if you didn't have anyone to kiss on New Year's? So what if you cried a little every now and then from feeling so alone? It was fine. It was absolutely fine, you told yourself. Fine. I'm absolutely fine, Wanda. I don't need a boyfriend to be happy. You sat across from your good friend, who was stirring her coffee with one hand while she tapped her fingers against the table with the other. She arched a skeptical eyebrow at you before taking a sip of her drink.
You're right, you don't, but you're lonely. A boyfriend would help with that.
There was no denying that she was right. Wanda was perceptive, and she was also one of your closest friends. You met her during your first week of living in New York, and she helped you adjust to living in such a busy, fast-paced area. She probably knew you better than you knew yourself, and that's why you slumped in defeat and threw back the last gulp of your mimosa. Ugh, God, you're right. You know I hate it when you're right.
I know, but don't worry, I can help.
Wanda, not that I don't appreciate your effort, but the last guy you set me up on a date with got mad that I didn't put out after he paid for my dinner. I'm sorry, but I don't want to go on any more blind dates.
I had no idea Kyle was like that. If I'd known he would be such an asshole, you know I wouldn't have set you up, but I wasn't going to suggest another blind date.
You tilted your head to the side. Okay. What did you have in mind then? She grinned and reached into her purse, fishing around until she found her phone.
I heard of a new dating app that made me immediately think of you. It matches you with people in your area based on your Google searches.
You scoffed, taking a quick glance at the screen before looking back to your friend. I'm sorry, that's the worst idea I've ever heard of.
I know, it's a strange concept, but it has one of the highest success ratings out of all the dating websites. It's only been around for 6 months, but over half of its users say that they found someone that they can see themselves spending the rest of their lives with.
Statistics can be made up, you know. Besides, one look from my browser history would send anyone running in the opposite direction.
Maybe not someone who has one similar to yours. Come on, what's the worst that could happen?
Wanda, you know what I do for a living, right? I could match up with some kind of serial killer. Your friend just waved you off and ordered another coffee, picking up her phone again and stuffing it into her pocket.
Just try it, please. Just give it a shot, and if it doesn't work out, then that's that, right? No harm done.
It's several hours later, and you find yourself sitting on the couch, staring at the same website homepage that Wanda had shown you. You bite your lip, letting your fingers skim over your laptop's keys, not typing anything just yet, but feeling their ridges as you consider the Join Now button. There wouldn't be any harm in it, right? Just like Wanda said, if you hated the kind of people you matched with, then you can always delete your profile. And you didn't only search things for your research. After all, you also Googled recipes and cute animal videos. What if you matched with a gorgeous guy who also Googled Try Not to Laugh Kitten Edition? After taking a deep breath to still yourself, you clicked on the button, making quick work of filling out the About You information. 5 minutes later, you'd chosen a profile picture and linked your Google account to the website, and you were ready to shift through your matches. The wheel on the screen turned slowly as your computer processed the information, and you actually jolted when it dinged with the results. Well, result. There was only one person who'd shown up with a similar search history as you. You let out a breath you hadn't known you were holding, and you almost closed your laptop and went to retrieve a pint of Ben & Jerry's from your freezer, calling it a day and forgetting the whole debacle. But then you saw his profile picture, and holy shit. He was lean and pale, and your eyes were immediately drawn to his long black hair. He had it slicked back in the photo, with just one strand hanging down over his left eye. In the photo, he was wearing an exquisitely tailored black suit with a black shirt and tie underneath it, and you couldn't help but let your eyes trail along the lithe contours of his body. He looked as if he were carved from marble. You almost started drooling just from the sight of him. You jumped again when your computer dinged for a second time, and your eyes widened when you saw that you had a new message in your inbox. With fingers that were just barely trembling, you opened it, skimming over the message from the man you just paired with.
Good evening. I must admit, I was quite surprised when I got the notification that we'd matched with one another. I've had this profile for about 4 months, and I'd yet to be paired with anyone.
So, he was handsome and eloquent. You clicked on his profile and blinked when you saw his name, Loki Odinson. Wow, even his name was refined, if not a little strange. It sounded like a name you'd give to one of the characters in your books. Hello, Loki. It's a pleasure to meet you. I was pretty surprised to find someone else who had such a twisted search history. I don't know if I should be happy or concerned. It only took him a few moments to reply.
The feeling is mutual. I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation for the morbidity, though. Mind that I happen to be a coroner for a living. And yours is?
I'm a writer. I write murder mysteries. So, yeah, morbidity seems like a fitting way to describe it. You explained, your interest piqued by his profession.
A writer, you say? I happen to be quite an avid reader. Would I know any of your work?
I'm not sure. Have you ever heard of The Bell Ringer? That's probably my most well-known book.
You're kidding.
He sent you a picture, and it was of a pale hand holding a copy of The Bell Ringer, your name glistening in bold font beneath the title.
I'm a great fan of your work, as you can see. I own several of your novels.
Another photo loaded beneath the newest text, and it was of a shelf full of your books. The Shrew Woman, A Night in New Hampshire, The Hanging Woman, 9 books in total. The only one that you'd written that wasn't there was the one you had just sent out to your publisher, and you suspected that once it was out in stores, it would be joining the ranks of Loki's shelf. Oh wow, it's always so nice to meet a reader. I'm so glad you like my stuff.
Oh, love, you're a huge talent. I must say I found your work rather inspiring.
That's so kind of you to say.
I know that this is rather forward, but are you doing anything tonight?
You glanced up at the clock you had hanging on the wall, 8:13 p.m. It was already pretty late. Typically, you'd be putting on your pajamas and curling up in bed to do some late-night reading here soon. But something inside you whispered that you should do it. You weren't spontaneous enough. What if this was an opportunity to meet the one? At the very least, it would be cool to meet such a loyal reader. It depends on if this guy I'm talking to online asks me out. Do you think he will?
He would have to be a fool not to. I suspect she'll ask if you'd like to meet at a cafe.
Well then, I suspect I'll have to say yes. An excited grin was plastered over your lips as you bantered back and forth. And when Loki sent you an address and a message saying, "I'll see you there in 20 minutes, you jumped off your sofa and rushed to put on your shoes. You were still dressed in the leggings and oversized sweater you wore to brunch with Wanda, and all you had to do was straighten your hair and pull on your boots before you were out the door. The address he sent you was within walking distance of your apartment. In fact, you had been there before, but never on a date. Your heart was pounding the entire way over, and you couldn't get over how unlike you this was. You didn't just get up and meet guys you met on the internet on such short notice, much less so late at night. And yet, here you were, stepping into the cafe 15 minutes after receiving Loki's message. Your eyes scanned the room, but it appeared he wasn't there yet. As you got in line to order, you tried to calm yourself, not wanting to look too frazzled when your date finally showed up. You tried to even your breathing, twisting the fabric of your sleeves between your nervous fingers. He's just a person. You've been on dates before. Everything is going to be fine. Nothing bad is going to...
Hello there.
You gasped and turned around, eliciting a chuckle from the man now towering over you. He was dressed in a set of black trousers, with a simple white button-down tucked into them, and his hair was loose and falling around his shoulders. His grin was wide and full of teeth, with just the slightest sinister edge to it. But his eyes were warm and twinkling with excitement, and just a hint of mischief. Those clear blue irises brought a smile to your own lips, and you chuckled along with him at your initial fright. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't hear you walk in."
It's quite all right. I know you already are aware, but I'm Loki.
You grinned and introduced yourself, going to shake his hand, but he smoothly cradled your fingers and drew them up to his lips, pressing a light kiss to your knuckles.
It's good to finally meet you in person.
He cooed, seemingly all too aware of how flustered you now were. You opened your mouth to say something in return, but you couldn't think of anything to say as silence lay heavy between the two of you. You were saved, though, when the barista called out to you, asking if she could take your order. You spun around on your heel and shot her a grateful glance before ordering your favorite menu item and reaching into your purse for your wallet.
And I'll have a cup of Earl Grey.
Loki stepped in, handing her a card from his open wallet. "Oh, I could have paid for mine."
No, love. It's my treat.
He gave you a tight, closed-lipped smile, and you didn't protest further as he paid for your orders. He led you to a booth in the corner, sliding into the side opposite yours gracefully. The leather squeaked against your thighs as you shuffled in, and when you were finally settled across from him, you caught a flicker in his eye that sent chills up your spine. It was gone instantly, though, replaced by the same suave look he had while ordering his tea.
So, as I said before, I'm a fan of your work. Truly, I have been since your very first novel.
He began, leaning forward with his elbows on the table. "Beauty in the Blood? I'm surprised. No one seemed to like that one. After reading it, my mom suggested I start going to therapy." Loki chuckled, licking his lips, and your eyes followed his tongue of their own accord.
Ah, well, whether or not that's true, it's still my favorite of your works by far. The parts told by the killer's perspective were beautiful. You captured his mind so artfully, it was as if...
He paused, searching your face for a moment.
It was as if you understood him.
You furrowed your eyebrows, thinking over his words. He skipped right over the small talk you come to suspect on first dates. But despite how strange of a direction the conversation was taking, you were intrigued by it. "Well, I feel like I did understand him. I mean, sure, he took delight in the killing of others, but he saw it as an art form. As twisted and evil as he was still a person that had come from my own mind. 'Cause the thing is..." You paused, gathering your thoughts and trying to find the right words to convey them. "The thing is that every storyteller uses bits and pieces of themselves to tell a story. A story is like a stained glass window. It's made up of different pieces of an author's mind and soul, and it comes together to create something greater than the sum of those pieces. So, yes, I think I can understand him. His darkness might be a reflection of my own, deep, deep down." You glanced up at him, blinking when you saw the transfixed look upon his face. His eyes were wider than they had been before, and his lips were parted as he listened. "Oh, sorry. I got a little carried away there. You probably think I'm some kind of freak."
I think you're beautiful.
His words took your breath away, and when the barista set down your cups on the table, you jumped in surprise.
"Is there anything I can get you guys?"
She cheerfully asked. A flash of annoyance crossed over Loki's face at the interruption. Oh, we're fine. Thank you." You assured her quickly, giving her a polite smile.
"You're so welcome."
You gripped your mug tightly as she walked away, savoring its heat as it warmed up your cold hands. "So, you mentioned that you're a coroner. What drew you to that profession?" You said, desperate to break the sudden silence that had fallen over the table. Loki sipped his tea, humming as he thought over the question.
Well, The conversation has already veered towards the darker side of things. I might as well tell you the story. When I was 12 years old, my sister killed herself.
Oh, Loki, I'm so sorry.
Oh, no, don't be. We weren't close at all. I was adopted at a young age, you see, and Helen never accepted me. She was cruel, and she took every opportunity she could to remind me of my inadequacies. But, as I said, one day she died. At first we didn't know how it happened. There were no marks on her body whatsoever. She just looked like she was sleeping as she lay there in bed. We called the hospital, and the police, and eventually the coroners discovered that she'd injected bleach into her arm. Later on, my mother found the syringe under her bed, and all the pieces of the puzzle fit together. We finally knew the how and the when, and I never really cared much about the why. That probably makes me sound like a monster, doesn't it?
You sat back, swallowing a scalding hot sip of your drink before answering. No, I don't think it makes you a monster. She abused you. It's only natural that you found some relief in her death. I probably would have felt the same way. He studied you for a moment, tracing the lip of his cup with his index finger.
I wonder if you would have.
He murmured to himself, so quietly that you almost didn't hear it. He sighed, plastering a smile on once more and straightening up.
Well, you probably aren't going to be very keen on a second date if I keep dragging our conversation into subjects like this. Tell me, where are you from? What made you move to the city?
How did you know I'm not from here?
Love. Neither of us have the New York accent, do we?
You laughed, and after the two of you fell into an easy flow, it seemed that the heavy beginning of the date made it all the easier to talk to him. You discussed what you liked about the city and what you didn't like. You learned that Loki was originally from a small town right outside of London, and that he has an adopted brother named Thor that he was close to.
He's an oaf,
He said when you asked what his brother was like.
Everything about him is literally the opposite of its coinciding part of me. But he loves me. He never thought of me as the adopted child. I was always just his brother. Despite his shortcomings, I do think he means well. Besides, his IQ level's in the single digits, so I'm afraid I must look out for him for fear of what would happen if he were left to his own devices.
From there, you shared stories about growing up, about life and ex-partners, mistakes and successes. Before you knew it, the happy barista from before was approaching your table again, this time with a nervous smile.
Hey guys, I'm so sorry to bother you, but we're closing up.
Loki glanced down at his watch, and you glanced down at your phone. 10:30 p.m. Oh shit, I had no idea. Time flies. Your date shot a glare at the barista before his eyes flickered back to you. He gave you a wide, closed-lipped smile, straightened his collar, and raised an eyebrow at you.
And I suppose it's time for us to head out. May I escort you home?
Oh, of course. I mean, if it's not too far out of your way.
Even if it is, I still wish to walk you home.
Your heart fluttered as you set a $5 bill on the table as a tip before standing up. The barista scurried away, and you almost turned to apologize to her for Loki's cold shoulder. But you didn't know him well yet. Maybe that's just how he was. Maybe he didn't mean anything by it.
You guys have a good night!
She called out after you, and you smiled over your shoulder at her before reaching for the door. Loki's hand darted out and grabbed the handle before you could, opening it for you with a slight bow.
After you, my lady.
How chivalrous. The two of you walk side by side down the street, hands brushing as you stroll down the sidewalk. You glanced upwards, smiling at the scattering of stars overhead as your breath fogged in the chilly air. You shivered, rubbing your arms a little bit to ward off the chill. Loki evidently caught the movement, and you felt his arm drape around your shoulders. You leaned into the warmth of his body, tilting your head up to share a grin with him. Again, chivalrous.
I try my best.
It's a beautiful night, isn't it?
Gorgeous. Not as gorgeous as you, but very pretty.
You laughed and hid your face in his neck. Oh, stop it. You're too charming.
Oh, really? I was under the impression there was no such thing.
The two of you fell back into companionable silence as you guided him towards your brownstone, until he spoke up once again.
I must say, there's a question that I've been meaning to ask you that I'm just dying to know the answer to.
Go ahead, Loki. I'm an open book. He laughed softly once more, hesitating before voicing his question.
Hypothetically, if you were to kill someone, how would you do it?
You paused, thinking over your response. Well, why am I killing them? Is it a crime of passion or a crime of necessity? Am I killing them just for the enjoyment of it, or out of revenge, or because the person needs to die for a bigger cause?
That is actually an excellent follow-up question. Let's say a crime of necessity. The person needs to die for a personal reason with no anger or revenge in mind. How do you do it?
You bite your lip, calling to mind all of the morbid Google searches that might apply. Air shot between the toes. You fill a syringe with air and inject it in between their toes while they sleep. It'll look like a heart attack that way. Unbeknownst to you, warmth suddenly bloomed in Loki's chest, and you glanced up just in time to catch the fond, almost loving gleam in his eye. He quickly looked away, tilting his head up to look at the stars, but you still caught it. And it wasn't that it unsettled you. You weren't uncomfortable because of the look. You were uncomfortable because you hadn't been upset by it. You felt that same flutter once again as butterflies batted around your ribcage. Nothing more was said as you turned the corner that led to your street, and you silently ascended your home steps with Loki's arms still around your shoulders. You reluctantly slid your key into the lock, only turning to him once your door was opened a bit. I had a really good time with you, Loki. I know this isn't what you're supposed to say to a guy after a first date. I know that it might scare you away, but I want you to know that I haven't felt this way in a long... Actually, I've never felt this way. And it's kind of scary, but I hope that we can do this again sometime soon. Loki's eyes softened, and he moved his hand from around your shoulders to your cheek.
I haven't felt this way either, but I know I don't want the feeling to go away.
He was leaning forward, his eyes closing, and your heart leapt into your throat as you met him halfway. His lips were cold, smooth, and soft as they pressed against yours, and you leaned into his touch when he pulled you closer by your hips. A soft sound escaped your throat as his tongue darted out, licking past the barrier of your mouth to glide itself against yours. His hands came up to cradle your cheeks, his thumbs rubbing against your cheekbones as your lips moved against one another, and you hummed once again as your chests pressed together. You don't know who pulled away first, but you spent a moment just taking in one another's essence. Your foreheads pressed together as the fog of your breaths mingled. You heard Loki let out a chuckle, and you looked up curiously. What is it?
I've just never felt like this before.
You smiled and pressed a peck to his lips before walking towards your door again.
Have a good night, love.
He called after you, and you paused in the doorway to blow him a kiss. You too, Loki. You shut your door, missing the way his gaze darkened as he stared at the facade of your building.
Oh, I will, darling. I will.
Loki hummed to himself, the leather of his gloves squeaking as he clenched and unclenched his fists. The silver of the table gleamed under the fluorescent lights of his basement, and the air was musty, thick with the smell of iron and decay. Instruments and tools were lined along the wall in front of him. Knives, machetes, a hatchet. It was cliché, he knew that, but he just hadn't been able to resist the temptation while designing this special room. A muffled scream sounded from behind him, and he rolled his eyes before turning back to the perky little barista who was currently strapped down to another metal table that he borrowed from the hospital morgue.
Are you honestly still trying to scream for help?
He snarked, raising an eyebrow at her.
I told you, you're currently under about 5 feet of solid concrete. Who will hear you? Who will help you?
The girl let out a sob, and he watched her big blue eyes flicker to the wall just over his shoulder before coming to rest on him again. They were red and swollen, and he let out a coo of false sympathy.
Oh, don't worry, little girl. None of these are for you. You can thank my new lover for that. No, she inspired me to take a different direction this evening.
A small, genuine smile came over his face as he picked up the large syringe, turning it over in his hands.
She's been inspiring me for a while, actually.
He mused, ignoring the screams as he sauntered over to his victim, syringe in hand.
She's such a brilliant writer, my darling is. It truly was fate that brought us together. If I had known that my favorite author was a beautiful young woman who also lived in Manhattan, well, I'm sure I would have found her sooner. But I won't dwell on lost time. I'll just have to make up for it.
He ran a hand over the girl's knee, trailing it down her shin even as she struggled against the strong ropes tied around her wrists and ankles. As his hand gripped the arch of her foot in an iron-like hold, he let his eyes close. This was always his favorite part. The moments right before death. The anticipation was like foreplay. It got him just as hot and eager, and the payoff was very nearly comparable. If you were ever asked to describe the feeling of ending another person's life, of ripping out the remaining chapters of their story before it could be written, the only thing he'd be able to compare it to was an orgasm. The white-hot pleasure that flooded his veins was addictive, as was the lead-up he was experiencing right now.
You know, my girl is so smart. Not a lot of people would think to off someone like this. But it's not as easy as you would think. You can't just use any old syringe. It has to be big. Has to be a lot of air. And you have to be careful. If you hit muscle, it won't be fatal. And the whole endeavor would be for naught. But if you hit a vein, and if you get a big enough pocket of air...
The duct tape on her mouth did little to quell her screams as he inserted the needle into her flesh. A novice might not be able to find a vein, especially not in a foot, but the years of medical school paid off, just as they did every day at his job. He injected the empty cartridge into her vein, groaning and letting his eyes drift shut. He was slow about removing the needle. The separation of steel from skin was slow, intimate, and gentle.
Hush. It's done now, love. It's done.
He let his arm fall to the side, and he took a step back, watching the girl start to settle down as he put some distance between them. He gently set the syringe down onto the table before crossing the room to an armchair in the corner. Letting out a soft grunt, he lowered himself into the seat, crossing his legs and letting his head fall back.
Fuck, what a day. This wasn't what I was expecting when I woke up this morning.
Loki lifted his head and gave the young woman a wary smile.
As you may have guessed, this isn't my first time doing something like this, but I do try to limit myself. I may take 5 victims a year, maybe 6 or 7 if I'm particularly stressed. My last one was on New Year's, though. I'm not due for a killing for another few months, but that girl really had me going. I was hoping that she'd invite me in tonight, though I wasn't expecting it. It was our first date, after all. But a man can hope, can't he? If she had invited me to stay the night, you wouldn't be here right now. Alas, though, I had all of these pent-up feelings that I had to do something with. And you were so obnoxious back at the cafe. I couldn't tell if you were being genuine with your disgusting, overbearing cheerfulness, or if it was as fake as your blonde hair. But God, did it get under my skin.
She let out a sob, and he noticed that she was beginning to shake. He chuckled, feeling himself grow hard in his trousers as he thought of you. you'd come up with this idea. This beautiful, drawn-out murder. Such a sweet, innocent-looking girl on the outside, but such delicious, pure wickedness within.
Oh, fuck.
He huffed, palming himself through his pants.
Despite the nuisance you made of yourself, today was so perfect. She's the one, you know. The one and only girl who can ever complete me. I didn't even believe in this sort of thing till this morning, but for the first time in my life, I'm glad I was wrong.
He forced himself to still his hand, moving it to his knee as his jaw clenched. In the past, he had done this in front of a few of his victims, male or female. The act of killing them made him so hard that he had to touch himself as he watched them squirm on his table. But not tonight. Not after you. That part of himself was only for you now, and he was strong enough to resist the urge until he was the only heart beating under his roof. And so, he sat back and watched. At first, the girl only shivered, and after 30 minutes, he was afraid he hadn't injected enough air into her. But then he noticed the way she was breathing. It was like she was a fish out of water, and the slope of her furrowed eyebrows betrayed the pain she was in.
Does it hurt?
He asked, his voice thick. At first she didn't answer, but then, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. He hummed in understanding, hiding his grin behind his hand as he scratched his chin.
How marvelous.
He knew she wouldn't last long when her skin started to turn blue. After an hour, the seizures began, jolting and shaking her body as if she were a rag doll. He watched in fascination, his cold blue eyes never leaving her tied-up form. Soft, strained whimpers were leaving her throat, and he let out a purr as her eyes rolled to the back of her head. His joints popped as he stood up, and the heels of his shoes clicked against the concrete floor as he rounded the table, making his way to her pretty blonde head. He slowly and deliberately pulled the duct tape away from her mouth, and he chuckled at how blue her lips had become.
This is a much better look on you. This is so much more real than those saccharine smiles.
She finally went still 84 minutes after the injection. Even after her heart stopped beating, he stood over her, watching the unnatural stillness of her chest. Despite all of the corpses he created over the years, and despite the years he'd spent in his profession, it was still something that he'd never gotten used to. People weren't supposed to be that still. People were supposed to blink and smile, talk, and breathe, but the things they became after death did none of those things. They didn't move, they didn't feel, and there was always a moment of disgust when he first laid eyes on a fresh corpse. But it passed quickly, even quicker than normal tonight. The disgust faded away and left behind pure, unadulterated lust as his thoughts strayed once more to you. Typically, he would stay behind, lingering in the basement to dispose of the body. Sometimes, if he wasn't too tired, he would actually drive out and deposit them in whatever spot he predetermined to be the one the police were to find them in. But tonight, he left the corpse there on the table. He flicked the lights off and climbed the first, then the second set of stairs, peeling off his gloves and petting his cat on the way to his bedroom. He showered and then combed his hair, then settled down between his silk sheets completely naked. Then, and only then, did his hand travel down to his cock, and his mind once again trekked back to you. Your face, your voice, your beautiful fucking mind. The thought that finally made him come was him picturing himself fucking you in a pool of blood on his basement floor, of the bright crimson painting your skin as he let his hands worship your body. The thought followed him into his dreams, ruby red and throbbing to the beat of his heart as he slept deeply into the night. Detective Romanoff stood by the side of her partner in front of the dead body, hands planted firmly on her hips as she chewed her lip.
How old did you say she was?
she asked the coroner, her eyes flicking down to the rope burns on the woman's wrists and ankles.
20.
Was Dr. Odinson's accented reply. He turned around, glancing between the two detectives before taking a deep breath and turning his attention back to the body.
I'm afraid that there won't be much investigating for the two of you to do here. The cause of death was a heart attack. Pure and simple.
Detective Rogers scoffed.
A 20-year-old having a heart attack? I think you got your wires crossed there, Loki.
Natasha watched as a muscle in the coroner's jaw twitched, and he let out a frustrated huff as he peeled off his gloves.
Detective, this sort of thing happens all the time. Freak accidents that can strike even the healthiest of people. They are unfortunate, but they're also a fact of life.
He tossed the balled-up gloves into a trash can and whisked past them, bending over to type something into the laptop resting on his desk as he continued speaking to them.
After reviewing her medical records, I found out that her father died 2 years ago from a heart attack. If I were a gambling man, I would say that a bad set of genes were the only culprit here.
What about the marks on her wrists? They gotta mean something, right?
Loki smirked, cutting his eyes over to her before straightening up.
Oh, I'm sure they do. It probably means that little Miss...
He paused, glancing down at a paper resting beside his computer.
Miss Alison Berry was into bondage before her untimely demise.
A woman is lying dead, Odinson. Show some respect.
Loki raised his hands up in surrender as he sauntered towards them.
I apologize if I offended you, Detective. I meant no disrespect. But I've run all the tests in the book. There were no signs of sexual assault, no signs of foul play. I'll type up a proper report for the two of you, but I'm telling you now. The girl died of a heart attack.
Natasha and Steve shared a look before turning back to the doctor.
Have the report ready for us before the end of the day.
She ordered, patting Steve on the shoulder and gesturing for him to follow her as she made her way out of the cold morgue.
Whatever you say, officer.
Natasha froze mid-step, feeling the hairs on the back of her head bristle as 1,000 images flashed through her mind after hearing him say that word. She gulped, oblivious to the confused look Steve was giving her, and she kept walking without turning back around.
It's detective now, doctor.
The door clicked shut behind them, cutting off Loki's dark chuckle as he was once again left alone with Alison Berry's body. His smile didn't fade as he pulled on another pair of gloves. If anything, it grew as he finished the young woman's autopsy.
I was being honest with them. You know that, don't you?
He winked at the girl's unseeing eyes, his hands moving of their own accord as he stitched up the clean line he cut through the skin, bone, and muscle of her chest.
It was just a heart attack.